Joining me as he does every Monday, the Australian's national editor, Dennis Shanahan. Dennis, we'll start with the PM. I've read everything you've read in recent days because I think we both agree it's been a shocker for the PM, and I don't think it's just been this detainee issue. I think he's been in trouble since The Voice. The polls now start to bear that out. But those headlines yesterday in the Sunday papers, focus groups saying we think he's a weak Prime Minister, a beta male, a follower, not a leader. That's shocking when it gets to focus groups regurgitating or referencing that back to you. That's when you know you're in trouble.
Indeed, Peter. Look, there's no doubt that the referendum loss on the Indigenous voice to Parliament has had a huge impact on Anthony Albanese personally. It has affected him, it's rattled him, and now it has, starting to come through in the polling, had an impact on how voters see him. He's seen to have, been out of touch on the way he did promote the referendum, and he failed as a leader to convince people, to persuade people to vote the way he thought. Now, what we've seen in the polls in recent weeks is a manifestation of that mistake that he made in the referendum, and it's now starting to bleed into his standing as Prime Minister. Also, we've seen in some polls the Labor Party's vote starting to drop as well. So the danger signs are here for Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister and leader, that he's in trouble personally, but it's starting to affect the party as well.
Yeah, I think he's starting to lack gravitas. I think those comments from the Chinese, handsome boy, diplomatically very deliberate. We've got summer as of Friday, of course. You know what that means. It means reshuffles. It means resets. Parliament after this week won't sit now until February. Peter Dutton says today, called for the resignations of Clare O'Neill and the junior minister there in the same portfolio, Andrew Giles. I'd add in Linda Burning. I think she's got to go given that catastrophic Voice defeat. This is shaping up to be a bit of a do-or-die summer for the PM, given we're now past, aren't we, the halfway mark of this term?
That's right. This is a key moment in any government's term. It's past the halfway mark. It's the end, that is before the Christmas break, the long summer break, going into next year, where an election can be held next year, still more likely in early 2025, but people are starting to think about elections and the election schedule. And so what we're seeing is a lot of pressure on Anthony Albanese. We've seen already on his own leadership, but it's also on the party and the team he has. And clearly there have been some very poorly performing ministers in recent weeks. And you would think that, one way, the traditional way during this period, is to have a reshuffle after the last sitting of Parliament, and then you give the ministers about 8 weeks to settle into new portfolios and so forth before they actually have to sit in Parliament again. Now, it works for some Prime Ministers. It was a real problem for Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard at this same stage, and Anthony Albanese's leadership is in the same trajectory that they were before they were ultimately removed as leader. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. All I'm saying is that this period, before Christmas and post-Christmas, February, March next year, when Parliament resumes in what could be an election year, then there is real problem for Anthony Albanese. A reshuffle is one way to solve things, to reset. By the way, Peter Dutton could do the same thing. It wouldn't hurt him to give some of the people on the front bench a bit of a burr under the saddle. But what we're seeing, I think, is the real pressure on Anthony Albanese to try and reset, reshape and reshuffle before March next year.
I might add too, in the Rudd-Gillard era, there wasn't the same pressures on families. There wasn't a cost of living bite to all of this, which I think that's the challenge for the current Prime Minister. But just quickly, you have been around a long time. What did you make of Labor's push last week? I haven't spoken to you since then, to try and brand Peter Dutton as a protector of pedophiles.
Well, look, I think, and as I said in The Australian, I just It was the lowest of the gutter politics. And look, we have seen, and Labor has correctly pointed out, that Peter Dutton has said some pretty rough things himself about the passage of legislation or the lack of legislation in the past. But what Clare O'Neil did last week was to overstep the parliamentary mark and make it personal. She specifically said, as an individual, Peter Dutton was the protector of pedophiles and an apologist for sex offenders, for child sex offenders. And Annika Wells made the mistake of repeating that or endorsing that outside the parliament. It was the wrong way to go. It was overreach and it damaged Labor. And at first, they didn't seem to realise where it was going. They were sticking with the lines that, oh, Peter Dutton's tough, talker, but he's weak on action. They just don't seem to get how the public sees some of this, and particularly to accuse a former policeman who's campaigned against child sex offenders as being a pedophile apologist and protector. It was just the wrong call, and Clare O'Neil made a big mistake politically and in parliamentary terms, and it's damaged the government and Anthony Albanese.
There's no doubt about that. Denis Shanahan, thank you.